May 31st, 2022. It's Tuesday in Albany, New York, the capital of the Empire State. But there's nothing imperial about the town itself.
Albany is known as Small Albany because it's got like a small town feel. It's lots of festivals and fairs, very close-knit.
Albany's a nice area, a lot of history in this city.
But this morning, one of the city's residents, a Sid Hemingway Powell, has mysteriously gone silent.
I called her Sunday. She didn't answer, so I'm like, maybe she just wants some time to herself.
Sid was known for just dropping off the radar. Sometimes she's needed peace of mind.
But after 2 more days of silence, Jackie Powell is starting to get worried.
I kept calling her and she's not answering her phone.
She hadn't heard from her since the 27th.
So she decides to go to her daughter's apartment.
Sid, it's Mom. Are you there?
I was ringing her bell, and she never came.
When there's no response, she calls the Albany police.
Jackie Powell called for a welfare check on her daughter.
Officers from our patrol division responded out there along with building management to access her apartment.
Oh, these are massive. This will get you to the world.
Just get us in now.
But it turns out they don't need a key.
When they got to her specific apartment, it was unlocked. It was closed, but it was unlocked.
The patrol officer tells Jackie and the property manager to wait outside.
They told me, we can't just let you in.
The patrol officer walked in. Nothing seemed in disarray or out of the ordinary. Just calling out Sid's name, trying to get some response.
Are you in here, Sid?
He goes to the back bedroom, and Sid is on her bed. She looks like she's sleeping.
But as the officer approaches her, he quickly realizes this is a sleep that she'll never wake up from.
Sid was unfortunately located deceased.
But Jackie's daughter isn't just dead. She's been murdered.
Sid had been shot in the head twice.
"30-year-old Sid Hemingway Powell had been a fighter all her life.
She don't mean any harm to nobody. She fights for love. She fights for her friends, her family.
And she did it with style.
Sid was always super outgoing and everything. She always had a lot of friends.
For Sid, the excitement never stopped.
Sid was the life of the party. Sid and I both loved to dance, but Sid will always try to outdo everyone, including myself.
Sid was like a wild child, but in a good way.
As she got older, Sid started participating in modeling shows, rapping, and performing on YouTube.
She performed under the name Chum Chum, and everybody loved it. She had a real talent for it.
And she dreamed of making a difference.
Sid wanted to change the world, and she believed that it started with you. We have to make the change.
Also a diligent student, Sid earned an associate's degree at a community college. But she wasn't finished.
She enrolled at the University of Albany. She wanted to get her degree to become a physician's assistant and then go on to become a doctor.
She wanted to help people. That was her thing.
In 2022, she graduated with a degree in biology.
Whatever challenges came her way, she was able to go beyond that because she was empowered to make a difference, not just for herself, but also for her community.
She was just amazing. She's the type of person that if you say, I'm going to the moon, she's going to read up on it. We're going to build this rocket. You could do it.
They celebrated her graduation with a party where she was surrounded by all those that loved her.
It was always just nothing but love at the end of the day.
But now,
Sid?
Only a few days after the happy occasion, Sid has been found murdered in her apartment.
Sid had sustained 2 gunshot wounds to her head.
She was beyond help.
The officer comes outside and tells her mom, Jackie, that Sid had passed away.
Did you find her?
Ma'am?
He was like, she's deceased. I just started crying.
Despite the shock, Sid's mother wants to help.
Do you have any idea who may have done something like this?
Nobody.
She was popular with all of Albany.
But Jackie Powell does tell police she was always afraid something like this might happen.
Why is that?
She was trans.
This might be a hate crime.
30-year-old Sid Hemingway Powell seemed destined for success.
She just graduated with a biology degree and was looking forward to starting her medical career as a physician's assistant.
Sid has so many goals that she wanted to achieve.
But now, after not hearing from her for a few days, Sid's worried mother has asked police to do a welfare check on her.
Albany police went to Sid's apartment and, upon making entry, located Sid, deceased. She was shot in the head twice.
Sid's mother tells the police that in the back of her mind, she'd always feared something like this might happen.
Her mother had worried about her safety because Sid was transgender.
Is that why she was murdered?
We wondered, was this going to be some kind of hate crime?
Or there could be a more personal motive.
Did somebody just not like her? We don't know what happened.
Was this an event where someone had met someone at a bar and went home and then was surprised that someone was trans? That was a fear.
As Sid's mother is taken to the station for a formal statement, homicide detectives arrive to begin the investigation.
Myself and Detective O'Donovan went to Sid's house and began to process and work the scene.
They start with the victim.
She was located in bed, covers pulled over her. She looked almost to be like sleeping.
On the left side of her bed, next to the wall, there were pillows propped up that looked like someone was just sitting on the bed next to her.
Investigators also see 2 gunshot wounds to her head.
Sid was shot in the left temple and also in the right temple.
Then, looking around the room, detectives find a single shell casing on the floor.
Somebody had taken the other shell casing, trying to hide what they did.
Detectives quickly rule out robbery as a motive.
The place wasn't ransacked. It didn't appear that money or credit cards or anything else was missing.
The one thing detectives couldn't find was the victim's phone. They suspected the killer didn't want the police to know who she'd been communicating with before she was killed.
That would reinforce what investigators suspect. Sid knew her killer.
Sid's door was not forced, and all the windows were locked. So whoever did it was allowed in there.
It had to be somebody she opened the door for and let them in.
In fact, the killer may well have been someone close to her.
In homicide cases, 2/3 of the cases that the victims are transgender, the people who end up killing are, intimate partners.
Unfortunately, the apartment complex didn't have any security cameras. So there was no video that could have identified the killer.
After finishing up at the apartment, detectives return to their office to talk to Sid's mother.
The first thing I want to ask about is, when did Sid transition?
It was right out of high school.
Sid's mother admits that at first it was hard for her to deal with the change.
I was mad, but we got around it. I accepted it. It took a little, not long, but it took a little minute for me to come around.
Eventually, Sid's whole family embraced her new identity.
Your personality doesn't change. It doesn't change who you are, the soul that you have.
Was there anybody that had a problem with Sid being trans?
No. She got along with everybody.
If you had a problem with her, that was your problem, not her problem.
But Sid's mother admits she doesn't know much about her daughter's personal life.
She was private for the most part. She really didn't talk much about her relationships.
However, Jackie says that a few days ago, her daughter had called and shared something very important about her life.
She was like, I got something to tell you. I don't want you to be upset.
She told me that she had HIV.
Detectives in Albany, New York, investigating the murder of a Sid Hemingway Powell, have just learned that not long before her death, the 30-year-old trans woman had tested positive for HIV.
She called me. She was like, Mommy, they said I had HIV.
She was like, I messed up. And I'm like, I immediately start crying.
Sid's mother tried to remain positive.
I was like, babe, you're going to be all right.
This is 2022. The advancements in medication and technology, it's been tremendous. You can live a long, healthy, normal life with this situation as long as you take care of yourself.
While HIV is no longer a death sentence, detectives do wonder if it had something to do with Sid's murder.
The biggest takeaway from Sid's apartment was that whoever killed her was allowed into that apartment and was someone that she allowed to get in her bed with her.
It was possible that her killer was a lover who had just found out about the test results, who also tested positive, and maybe blamed Sid.
But Jackie doesn't know who that could have been.
My kids don't really tell me about their private life because I start asking questions. I got 100 questions.
After talking to a Sid's mother, detectives interview other members of her family, hoping Sid may have confided in them.
She just wanted the same thing that every girl wants.
She wants somebody who's going to love her openly.
But for Sid, that was sometimes hard to find.
Sid's sister told detectives that Sid would sometimes date men who were on the down low, men who presented as straight to the world.
A man like that could certainly fit the profile of the killer being constructed by detectives.
If you're on the down low, if you're ashamed and embarrassed to be with this person, imagine how you'd react if they tell you they have HIV and you're at risk.
Now detectives are looking for a man in Sid's recent past. But can her family give them a name?
Rumors started flooding in and everybody started saying different names.
But there's one name in particular that keeps coming up.
Very early on, Ayer's name was being provided to us by different family and friends.
26-year-old Ayer Robinson had known Sid for quite some time.
Albany is a small city, and the Robinsons and Hemingways had a cousin or two in common, and they kinda came up near each other.
Sid and Ayer would often hang out and smoke weed, but eventually they took things to the next level.
Sid and Ayer Robinson had been together in a non-exclusive relationship for a long time.
I know about their relationship for, I think, 5 years. It may have been even longer than that.
However, those close to Ayer didn't know.
Nobody from his life at that time knew.
He has children and baby moms and things like that, whatever. It was obviously a lot more difficult for him.
Given the complicated nature of their relationship, police suspect Ayer may have been involved in Sid's murder.
Right then and there, he's a person of interest. He's somebody we're definitely going to want to speak to at some point.
But when detectives ask if they suspect Ayer had something to do with Sid's death, the family finds it hard to believe.
Sid definitely loved Ayer. She mentioned it many, many times.
Every time she talks about it, she's like, oh, but he loves me. We just, we can't be together.
And according to Sid's brother, Ayer knew about Sid's recent HIV diagnosis.
Sid told her brother that she had shared the news with him soon after she got her test results.
And though Ayer is at the top of the list of people police need to talk to, He isn't the only name on it.
According to Sid's siblings, she had been seeing another guy, someone they knew less about than Ayer.
But we actually never met the guy.
They knew him only as Big Papa.
Sid's friends and family were all aware of Big Papa, but the only person who had seen him was Sid's brother Amir, and that occurred on a FaceTime.
Can you describe him for me?
He was a white guy, older guy.
And he had money to burn.
She would ask him for stuff or whatever, and he would give it to her. That was kind of the relationship with him.
Big Papa got referred to as a sugar daddy.
He would take her to clubs and parties, and he would let her use his car when she needed to go somewhere.
But she never told you his name?
No, never.
Hoping to track down both Ayer and Big Papa, investigators subpoena Sid's phone records.
They also subpoenaed her credit card, social media, and bank accounts. Anything that might help track her movements in her final days.
While waiting for results from the subpoenas, detectives received the results of the autopsy.
The autopsy confirmed that there were 2 shots fired into her head, both at close range.
There was some stippling around the wound, and there was damage to the skin, consistent with a gun being pressed against the head and fired.
The time of death was late Friday night or early Saturday morning, sometime before 6 a.m.
But who was with Sid late that night? A call from Sid's mom provides a possible answer.
Homicide?
There is something that she hadn't mentioned that might be important.
She stated she had been with Sid a couple days prior. Sid had been FaceTiming a male in Louisiana.
His name was DJ Barnes.
They had met online. They were messaging over Facebook.
But it was more than just an online relationship.
Sid had actually bought him a bus ticket to come up here from Louisiana. DJ was going to be coming into town before the date of Sid's death.
Was he some kind of online predator?
Detectives have just learned that before she was murdered, a Sid Hemingway Powell was planning a first-time meetup with a man she met online.
Sid had been communicating online with a man named DJ Barnes, back and forth, and it was very flirtatious.
DJ and Sid had met through social media, and there was a plan for him to come to Albany to visit her.
Had DJ traveled to Albany to see Sid and then killed her?
That was another question that needed to be answered.
Maybe the meeting didn't go how DJ hoped it would. Since they never met in person, maybe he didn't know Sid was a trans woman.
When detectives get access to Sid's phone records, the first contact information they pull is for DJ Barnes.
Detective Lawyer conducted a phone interview with him, and he admitted to having some sort of online relationship with her.
But he insists he had nothing to do with her death.
He said he learned about what happened through social media, and that he was sad he never actually got to meet Sid in person.
He planned on trying to come up and see her, but he said it never ended up happening.
So detectives ask him about the bus ticket to Albany that Sid had bought him.
He said his boss never ended up giving him the time off, so he never used the bus ticket.
Investigators contact the bus company to confirm DJ's story.
The bus ticket was never cashed in.
Albany police were able to show that he didn't leave Louisiana.
With DJ eliminated as a suspect, detectives turn their attention to Sid's alleged sugar daddy, the man known as Big Papa.
I never met him. I never seen him in person.
But now, detectives are able to identify him.
We figured out through her phone records Big Papa's real name.
He's a 60-year-old Albany resident named Kyle Collins.
The investigators ran his name through a police database, and they found a very minimal criminal record. The worst thing was a fairly recent charge of petty larceny.
But when detectives head to the address on his arrest record, there's nothing there.
It was just an empty lot. If he lived there before, he doesn't now.
When investigators call him, though, they have more luck.
Hello? We were able to finally get in contact with him by phone, but he kept the interview very short.
What exactly was your connection with her?
According to Kyle, they talked on the phone fairly regularly, but it had been nearly a year since he'd seen her in person.
Kyle had not seen her in a while, and his reason was that Sid was too expensive for him.
What do you mean?
Kyle says that Sid liked to party and go to clubs, and that she'd ask him for money.
All right, look, I'm gonna ask you straight up. Did you have anything to do with her murder?
Absolutely not.
He even claims he was out of town the night Sid died, and his phone's GPS data can confirm it.
A follow-on of his phone records, he showed not to be in the area of Sid's apartment on the night she was murdered.
There was no indication that Big Papa did any harm to Sid.
But after clearing Kyle Collins, investigators get another possible lead.
Detectives were contacted by another one of Sid's friends who said she was hanging out with Sid at her apartment on the Thursday before the murder.
While she was there, Ayer Robinson came over.
What happened then?
She had asked him to go into the bedroom just to talk.
And when they came back, she could tell something was wrong.
The energy was off. She wasn't really there.
What about Ayer?
He didn't really say a word.
I'm just gonna go.
All right. Will call me later?
Yeah. Oh.
When her friend finally asked what was wrong, Sid said she'd received some bad medical news.
What is going on?
I went to the doctor and they told me I have cancer.
Oh my God, Sid. I am so sorry.
Detectives know that Sid didn't have cancer, but she had recently learned that she was HIV positive.
Could that be what Sid told Ayer in the bedroom?
I don't know. Maybe.
To find out more about Sid's diagnosis, detectives contact her doctor.
After getting several HIPAA waivers and consents, we were able to interview medical staff at the Infectious Disease Center.
A staff member says she remembers speaking to Sid when she came in for testing, and that she wasn't alone.
She came in with a guy.
She was accompanied by a black male who also requested HIV testing.
Do you remember who it was?
I can't tell you his name.
Was the man Ayer Robinson?
Ayer Robinson was seeing Sid on the low.
Could an HIV diagnosis be the motive behind the murder?
Detectives investigating the murder of a Sid Hemingway Powell have learned that when she went to a local clinic for an HIV test, she was accompanied by a black male.
The man had also been tested for HIV, but because of patient confidentiality, the clinic staff could not release his name.
Give you his name.
Was Ayer Robinson the man with Sid at the clinic? Or was it another boyfriend investigators have yet to identify?
We'll be getting a court order to unlock the man's records.
Okay.
When detectives get their warrant, their suspicions are confirmed.
Ayer Robinson was the man who came with Sid to get HIV tested on the morning of the murder.
Was he still with her that night when she was murdered?
We had determined that Ayer Robinson was a suspect, but we wanted to keep building. We knew this was going to be a circumstantial case.
Detectives start by getting Ayer's phone records to track his movements after they left the clinic.
We're able to get where their phones were located at certain times. We're able to see they went to a nearby McDonald's, which is in walking distance to the clinic they had gone to.
They enter the restaurant and stay there for a bit, presumably having a meal together.
After that, Sid went to her apartment, and Ayer left in another direction.
We then track him all throughout the city until he goes into a corner store.
Detectives are able to track Ayer's movements until finally he returned to Sid's apartment.
Ayer came back to Sid's apartment around 8 o'clock that night. That was only minutes before Sid made her last social media post.
The data shows Ayer stayed in Sid's apartment until early the next morning, when both phones left the building.
The GPS data showed the phones traveling down the road toward the Albany airport and then stopping at a hotel.
Detectives immediately request footage for any of the hotel's exterior surveillance cameras.
The hotel was affixed with security cameras, which we were able to review. As soon as we did that, that's when it got good.
The video shows a car pull up, and a black male gets out.
He just starts smashing this phone on the ground, to the point where he actually has to take his crossbody bag off because it's bouncing so hard.
He then goes over to the dumpster and throws out the cell phone and his sweatshirt.
Investigators can't be sure that Ayer is the man in the video.
You couldn't determine who the person was, but you could tell it was a black male.
However, the investigation of the hotel ultimately yields important evidence.
Through our review of video surveillance, we're able to get a license plate to obtain a registered owner of that vehicle.
The owner is a known friend of Ayer Robinson.
Now, they didn't just have a guy who matched Ayer's description. They had a guy who looked like Ayer driving one of his friend's cars with Ayer's phone in it.
All of that circumstantial evidence is enough to obtain a warrant for Ayer's arrest.
We were conducting surveillance on Ayer Robinson's house, and if he came out, we were going to detain him.
While they're watching the house, Ayer comes outside, but he quickly spots the detectives.
He ended up fleeing on foot.
Please stop! Ayer Robinson proceeds to go in a full sprint down the street.
There's a short foot chase where he discards drugs.
He's dropping something!
The chase comes to an abrupt end.
Some good Samaritan opens his car door into Ayer to stop him. Ayer Robinson is taken into custody.
After the arrest, officers search the house where Ayer was staying.
A quantity of narcotics, along with a loaded firearm, were recovered.
But the gun is a different caliber from the shell casing recovered beside Sid's bed.
We never recovered the murder weapon. We believe it went in the dumpster along with his hoodie and Sid's phone.
But the police find one more piece of evidence, one that could make their case.
The individual that's destroying the phone in the video surveillance is equipped with a crossbody bag.
Inside Ayer's room, they found a crossbody bag.
We believed it was the same one.
Inside, they see what appears to be dried blood.
That's our evidence.
In a search of Ayer Robinson's house, detectives have found what appears to be dried blood inside a crossbody bag, seemingly identical to the one seen in security video on the man they believe killed a Sid Hemingway Powell.
Detectives believed that blood spatter got on the gun when the 2 fatal shots were fired.
Based on the wounds Sid had, we believe that it was a close contact gunshot. The belief was that after they shot Sid, they would have reholstered their handgun into the crossbody bag.
With Ayer in custody, the detectives are ready to confront him with what they found.
Ayer Robinson's transported down to our detective office and interviewed by Detective O'Donovan and myself.
The detectives tell Ayer that they know he's been having sex with Sid.
People told me they heard you saying you love this person.
Right.
Ayer ultimately admitted he was in a relationship with Sid.
I laid with her, I chilled with Sid, you feel what I'm saying?
But he denied testing positive for HIV the morning of the murder.
No, I didn't get no bad news that day.
But the detectives know both he and Sid tested positive when they went to the clinic.
It's not even supposed to be, that's supposed to be confidential.
Ayer also denies having anything to do with her death.
That's crazy.
Yeah, well, that's what we're here to clear up.
So the detectives switch gears to the night of the murder.
So we know that you go over to Sid's house on Thursday the 26th, and you're the last person that's with her while she's alive.
I don't think I was the last, though.
Okay. At any point, do you take Sid's phone?
No.
Ayer just thought we didn't know as much as we knew.
The detectives show Ayer proof that his phone and Sid's were in the same locations after the murder.
We showed him his phone records for the night of incident.
And they tell him they have him on video smashing her phone.
And you're on video getting out of that car, throwing a phone on the ground. Do you remember any of that?
Yeah, angry because she went to my phone.
Ayer also has an explanation for why he's on video throwing his hoodie in the dumpster.
I had liquor all over my hoodie.
Okay.
He was quick on his feet with answers to stuff.
He even has an explanation for the blood found in the crossbody bag during the search of his home.
He came up with a wild story of how Sid had gotten her finger pricked at the doctor's, and she had used a tissue to stop the bleeding and gave it to him.
But there's one question he doesn't have a ready answer to.
We asked Ayer if, when he left the apartment, Sid was bleeding at any point. After about 2 minutes of silence from Ayer, he stated no.
Ayer insists he can't help them.
Bro, I didn't do that to Sid, bro.
Still, after their interview, Ayer Robinson is booked on a second-degree murder charge.
New York's first-degree murder statute is not for what we would consider the more common homicides that occur. It is for somebody who kills a police officer or somebody who almost like plans like an assassination.
When Sid's family hears the news, they are thankful that it seems he is going to pay for what he did.
When I found out that Ayer was arrested, I was happy. So many murders go unsolved, especially for transgender individuals. A lot of times that we don't see the resources put behind those investigations to help actually solve those murders.
In October of 2023, Ayer Robinson goes on trial for murder in the Albany City Court.
Ayer just seemed very nonchalant, like a smug, I'm going to get away with it type of attitude.
And in her opening, the prosecutor admits she doesn't know why Ayer killed Sid.
I think Sid being a trans woman was a large factor, and Ayer maybe not being comfortable yet with admitting that he loved a trans woman. Thankfully, I don't have to prove a motive in New York. I only have to prove the elements of the crime.
Because according to Sid's family, she hadn't given Ayer HIV. It was the other way around.
Sid's literal words to me were, I need to know his results because once I know his results, I'll know where I got it from.
So according to the prosecution, receiving his positive diagnosis the morning of the murder was likely the catalyst for his actions.
Ayer gets his rapid test. So later in the day, there's a phone call to him from the health provider that says, hey, you're positive. That's the night he kills Sid.
When he went to see her that night, he had a gun in his crossbody bag.
Ayer knew what he was going to do when he went over there.
Are you sure you're okay?
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is.
Okay.
He waited till Sid fell asleep.
Then he took out his gun.
The wicked truth of the matter is he shot my baby in the head. He thought she was alive and went and shot her on the other side of the head.
He gets up, picks up one of the shell casings, and he leaves.
The prosecution also shows the jury the security video of Ayer getting rid of the evidence.
He smashed Sid's phone and threw the phone, the gun, and his blood-stained hoodie into a dumpster.
Instead of disputing the evidence, the defense focuses on Sid and her lifestyle.
The defense attorney really victim shamed her in this case. He painted Sid as this promiscuous girl, as a prostitute.
They try to paint Sid in a trial as some type of sexual deviant. That's just crazy.
It's one thing to defend your client. It's another to go after the dead and shame her the way they did.
But the jury finds the evidence more persuasive than the attacks on Sid's character.
Ayer Robinson was found guilty of murder.
When the verdict came in, I was very relieved. For my first time in my life having faith in the American justice system.
And the judge imposes the harshest sentence possible.
Murder in the second degree, the maximum punishment allowable in New York State is 25 years to life.
It's a welcome relief to Sid's family.
I was just glad that we have answers, that we have a resolution to all of this, because so many families don't.
And Sid's family can take solace in the knowledge that she always lived her life with love and compassion, and without apology.
She didn't want to be seen as just a transgender woman. She wanted her transition to be second to her success and who she was as a person.
Don't worry about how people feel about you. Be you and be the best version of you.
She has so many dreams. Rapper, doctor. I used to be like, babe, what you gonna do? I'm gonna do it all, Mom. I'm gonna do it all.
The early 1970s in Houston, Texas, was a period marked by rapid urban expansion, relentless industrial momentum, and an everyday atmosphere of suburban freedom. The neighborhoods of the Houston Heights and Pasadena were populated by working-class families whose daily routines revolved around nearby refineries, rail yards, and manufacturing facilities. Within this blue-collar environment, children and adolescents enjoyed an unrestricted independence that allowed them to navigate their neighborhoods without close parental oversight. Young boys rode their bicycles across sunlit thoroughfares, gathered at corner grocery stores, and explored vacant lots until darkness settled over the Gulf Coast plains. However, this casual freedom existed alongside a glaring systemic vulnerability within the region's law enforcement apparatus. Missing adolescents were almost invariably categorized as voluntary runaways rather than potential victims of violent crime. Police departments routinely advised distressed parents to remain calm and wait, operating under the institutional presumption that rebellious youths had simply fled to coastal resort towns or joined the countercultural movements drifting across the American Southwest. This persistent bureaucratic dismissal created an environment where predatory activity could flourish entirely unimpeded, establishing the tragic foundation for one of the most devastating criminal sagas in the history of the United States. Within this landscape of quiet vulnerability moved Dean Arnold Corll, an individual whose unassuming exterior concealed an appetite for calculated, methodical destruction. Born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, in 1939, Coral had relocated to Texas with his family and gradually integrated himself into the local community. His family operated the Pecan Prince Candy Company in Houston Heights, a business enterprise that would later provide the origin for his grim moniker, the Candy Man. While working in the family storefront, Coral routinely distributed complimentary confections and treats to the neighborhood children who congregated near the premises. To casual observers, neighbors, and local shopkeepers, he projected an image of gentle domesticity, polite manners, and unimpeachable respectability. He had completed honorable service as a radar technician in the United States Army, maintained steady employment with the Houston Lighting and Power Company, and conducted his daily affairs with quiet efficiency. His soft-spoken speech, tidy appearance, and willingness to assist acquaintances deflected any suspicion that might otherwise have attached to an adult bachelor living in close proximity to young boys. Yet behind the facade of ordinary citizenship, Coral harbored severe sadistic inclinations, sociopathic detachment, and sexual compulsions that demanded absolute subjugation of his chosen victims. Recognizing that solitary predatory assaults on strangers carried significant risks of exposure, Coral devised a complex strategy centered on peer recruitment. He understood that adolescent boys were naturally guarded against unfamiliar adults, but completely unguarded when invited into social activities by friends from their own neighborhoods. To establish a self-sustaining recruitment system, Coral sought to manipulate and corrupt vulnerable local youths who could act as unsuspecting intermediaries. His primary initial recruit was a young boy named David Owen Brooks, whom Coral met around 1968 when Brooks was approximately 12 years old. Coral approached Brooks through targeted grooming, showering him with attention, financial gifts, modern electronics, and access to customized vehicles. For a youth navigating personal difficulties and financial instability, Coral appeared as an extraordinary benefactor and mentor figure. Over several years, Coral established deep psychological dominance over Brooks, introducing him to marijuana, alcohol, and the intoxicating illusion of adult autonomy. Gradually, the relationship shifted from paternalistic mentorship to dark criminal complicity. Brooks began introducing his classmates and neighborhood acquaintances to Coral, initially unaware of the catastrophic consequences, but eventually succumbing to fear, monetary compensation, and psychological entrapment as Coral's sinister intentions were progressively revealed behind closed doors. While Brooks served as an effective initial conduit, his naturally hesitant demeanor and growing unease limited his utility in expanding the scope of the operations. Coral required an associate with greater social confidence, extensive local networks, and a bolder willingness to exploit relationships for material gain. In 1971, that requirement was fulfilled through the arrival of Elmer Wayne Henley Jr., a charismatic and resourceful high school dropout living in Pasadena. Introduced to Coral through mutual acquaintances, Henley quickly captured Coral's attention as an ideal recruitment operative. Coral applied his proven grooming techniques, outfitting Henley with stylish attire, lending him automobiles, and integrating him into an adult lifestyle far beyond his modest financial means. Unlike Brooks, whose compliance was rooted in fear and passive submission, Henley quickly adopted a pragmatic, transactional approach to the arrangement. Coral established a formal bounty system, offering Henley approximately $200 for every young male delivered directly to his residences. In the economic reality of working-class Texas during the early 1970s, this compensation represented a substantial fortune for an unemployed teenager, creating a perverse financial incentive that dissolved moral hesitation and transformed ordinary friendships into lucrative commodities for betrayal. With Henley and Brooks actively operating throughout the Heights, Pasadena, and adjacent districts, the recruitment apparatus achieved devastating efficiency. The accomplices systematically targeted male teenagers aged 13 to 20, focusing primarily on schoolmates, neighbors, hitchhikers, and casual acquaintances who frequented local pool halls, drive-in restaurants, and neighborhood street corners. The method of entrapment relied entirely on deception rather than immediate physical force. Henley or Brooks would encounter potential targets and propose an enticing social outing, promising an evening filled with free alcoholic beverages, high-quality marijuana, and lively parties at Coral's residences. Because the invitations came from familiar peers, the victims willingly entered vehicles, completely unaware that their movements were carefully monitored and their fates preordained. Coral leased various residential properties across Houston and Pasadena, specifically selecting locations on Columbia Street, Schuyler Street, and 28th Street that provided privacy and adequate distance from neighboring homes. Upon entering these domestic settings, the victims found an environment deliberately calibrated to lower their defenses. Music played continuously, refreshments were served, and casual conversations were maintained until the victims consumed intoxicating substances that impaired their physical coordination and cognitive awareness, rendering them utterly vulnerable to sudden ambush. Once a victim was incapacitated or sufficiently distracted, the hospitable atmosphere abruptly vanished into absolute terror. Coral, frequently assisted by Henley or Brooks, would suddenly brandish a firearm, disarm any potential resistance, and force the victim into complete physical restraint. The central instrument in Coral's domestic chamber of horrors was a custom-built plywood apparatus commonly known as the torture board. This device consisted of a wide, heavy wooden plank fitted with industrial-grade leather straps, metal ropes, and bolted handcuffs positioned to secure a human body in a spread-eagle configuration. Secured tightly to this board, stripped of clothing and immobilized, the victims were subjected to prolonged hours of physical abuse, sexual assault, and psychological torment. Coral derived intense gratification from absolute dominance over his captives, inflicting pain systematically while maintaining precise control over their consciousness through chemical substances and physical restraints. In many instances, Coral compelled his victims to write letters to their families, dictating false explanations that they had departed the city to seek employment in distant regions or explore alternative lifestyles. These coerced letters served a critical defensive purpose, effectively pacifying anxious relatives and reinforcing the narrative that the missing youths were mere runaways. Following the protracted torment, Coral executed his victims through manual strangulation with heavy cords, gunshot wounds to the head from small-caliber weapons, or a combination of both methods. The disposal of the deceased was executed with calculated, industrialized precision to eliminate physical evidence. The remains were wrapped in heavy plastic sheeting or canvas bags, bound securely with electrical tape, and transported under cover of darkness to pre-selected clandestine burial locations across southeast Texas. Coral utilized a rented storage stall at the Southwest Storage Facility in Pasadena, burying numerous victims beneath the dirt floor and applying agricultural lime to accelerate decomposition while suppressing telltale odors. Other bodies were transported to the remote coastal dunes of High Island Beach on the Bolivar Peninsula, or buried within the dense, isolated pine woodlands surrounding Lake Sam Rayburn in East Texas. For 3 continuous years, from 1970 to 1973, this covert machinery operated without generating formal police investigations, leaving dozens of families in unresolved anguish while 29 young men vanished into unmarked graves. Yet behind the apparent perfection of Coral's terrifying enterprise, escalating tensions, financial disputes, and unpredictable interpersonal volatility were steadily eroding the lethal alliance from within, steadily pushing the fragile criminal partnership toward an explosive, fatal breaking point that would soon expose the entire nightmare to the surrounding community and the wider world. By the summer of 1973, the machinery of deception and murder that Dean Coral had constructed began to fracture under the weight of escalating paranoia, erratic behavior, and deteriorating internal alliances. The transactional arrangement that had once bound Elmer Wayne Henley and David Brooks to their older benefactor was unraveling into a toxic dynamic characterized by mutual suspicion and mounting dread. Coral had grown increasingly insatiable, demanding a continuous supply of victims with a reckless urgency that alarmed his teenage accomplices. Henley, who had initially viewed the gruesome enterprise through the detached lens of financial opportunism, started to recognize the terrifying reality of his own expendability. The boundaries that Coral had established to separate his public persona from his private atrocities were blurring, and his temper flared with unpredictable ferocity over trivial misunderstandings. Brooks, consumed by lingering trauma and passive cowardice, had largely withdrawn from the active procurement phase, leaving the burden of recruitment almost entirely upon Henley. This isolation intensified Henley's anxiety, as he realized that the secrets he harbored were heavy enough to guarantee his own execution should Coral ever perceive him as a liability. The illusion of camaraderie and mutual trust had evaporated, replaced by a suffocating atmosphere of psychological warfare where survival depended on hypervigilance. The criminal partnership reached a critical mass, setting the stage for a violent confrontation that would shatter the silence surrounding the disappearances of dozens of boys across the region. The collapse of this nightmare materialized during the humid evening of August 8, 1973, setting into motion a chaotic sequence of events that would forever alter the criminal history of the United States. Henley arrived at Coral's rented residence in Pasadena accompanied by two companions, Timothy Curley and a teenage girl named Rhonda Williams. The inclusion of a female guest was an unprecedented and dangerous deviation from the strict operational parameters that Coral had rigidly enforced throughout their association. Coral harbored a profound aversion to the presence of young women in his domain, viewing them not only as undesirable targets, but as unpredictable variables that threatened his controlled environment. Upon discovering Williams inside his home, Coral struggled to mask his simmering fury beneath a veneer of hospitable indifference. He provided the youths with alcohol and marijuana, adhering to his customary method of chemical pacification. But the underlying tension in the house was palpable and suffocating. As the night progressed and the intoxicants took effect, the superficial party atmosphere deteriorated into a sinister waiting game. Curley and Williams, completely oblivious to the historical horrors that permeated the walls around them, eventually succumbed to fatigue and fell asleep in the living area. Henley, equally impaired but intuitively aware of Coral's dangerous mood, also drifted into a vulnerable state of unconsciousness, mistakenly believing that the immediate threat had passed and that the situation could be managed the following morning. That miscalculation became apparent when Henley jolted awake to discover a scene of paralyzing terror unfolding in the dim light of the Pasadena residence. Coral shed his disguise completely, revealing the predator beneath as he stood over his restrained guests, holding a .22 caliber pistol. Curley and Williams had been securely bound, their limbs immobilized by the same heavy cords and restraints that had sealed the fates of 29 previous victims. Henley found himself similarly incapacitated, his wrists tightly bound, realizing with sudden, horrifying clarity that his status had shifted from privileged accomplice to designated victim. Coral raged at Henley, expressing a deep, venomous betrayal over the introduction of a female into his sanctuary, and explicitly outlined his immediate intention to murder all three of them before the sun rose. The infamous plywood torture board was dragged into the center of the room, standing as a grim monument to the agony that awaited them. Coral meticulously prepared his instruments of torment, his demeanor reflecting the cold, methodical anticipation of a man who had performed this macabre ritual dozens of times before. Faced with the undeniable reality of his own imminent demise, Henley experienced a desperate surge of self-preservation. He engaged Coral in a tense, high-stakes psychological negotiation, drawing upon years of manipulation and misplaced trust, desperately attempting to convince the older man that he remained a loyal and willing participant in the gruesome enterprise. Through frantic pleading and calculated deception, Henley successfully persuaded Coral to release his restraints, arguing that he needed his hands free to assist in the torture and eventual execution of Curley and Williams. It was a fatal error by Coral, born of deep-seated arrogance and a misguided belief in his absolute psychological supremacy over the young men he had corrupted. The moment his bindings were loosened, Henley sprang into action, closing the physical distance between them before Coral could fully process the betrayal. A chaotic, desperate struggle ensued for control of the deadly firearm, the room erupting into violent motion as the two former conspirators fought for their lives. Henley, fueled by the primal adrenaline of survival, managed to pry the .22 caliber pistol from Coral's grasp. He scrambled backward, leveling the weapon at the man who had orchestrated years of unimaginable bloodshed. Coral, momentarily stunned but defiantly confident, lunged forward to reclaim the weapon, daring Henley to pull the trigger. Without any hesitation, Henley fired multiple rapid shots, the sharp cracks of the small-caliber weapon shattering the early morning silence. The bullets tore through Coral's torso and shoulder, stopping his advance instantly. The Candy Man collapsed onto the floor, his reign of terror abruptly terminated in a pool of blood within the very room where he had inflicted endless suffering upon so many defenseless boys. The aftermath of the fatal shooting was characterized by shock, confusion, and a frantic scramble as Henley worked to untie his terrified companions. After liberating Curley and Williams, Henley placed a frantic telephone call to the Pasadena Police Department, stating simply that he had just shot and killed a man who had attempted to assault him and his friends. When responding officers arrived at the residence, they discovered Coral's lifeless body and initially processed the scene as a straightforward case of self-defense arising from an interpersonal dispute. However, As detectives began to question Henley at the police station, the emotional weight of his prolonged complicity caused his psychological defenses to collapse entirely. Overcome by a complex mixture of guilt, relief, and profound trauma, Henley began to articulate a confession that was so expansive and horrific that seasoned investigators initially struggled to comprehend its magnitude. He described the torture board, the systematic abductions, and the brutal executions, painting a portrait of a serial murder operation unparalleled in American history. Skeptical detectives demanded tangible proof of these fantastical claims, prompting Henley to lead them directly to the rented boat shed at the Southwest storage facility. There, amidst the sweltering Texas heat, investigators unsealed the corrugated metal structure and began the grim task of probing the loose dirt floor, bracing themselves for whatever horrors lay buried beneath the surface of the unassuming shed. The ensuing excavation at the Pasadena storage facility initiated a macabre archaeological recovery that horrifyingly validated every detail of Henley's extensive confession and shocked the conscience of the nation. As law enforcement personnel meticulously removed layers of dirt and agricultural lime, they uncovered the heavily decomposed remains of 17 young men, their bodies stacked haphazardly in shallow, overlapping graves. The discovery triggered a massive, multi-jurisdictional investigative mobilization as Henley and Brooks subsequently guided authorities to additional burial sites on the isolated beaches of the Bolivar Peninsula and the dense pine forests near Lake Sam Rayburn. By the time the exhausting recovery operations concluded, 29 distinct victims had been unearthed, solidifying the Houston mass murders as the deadliest serial killing case in the United States at that time. The subsequent criminal trials captivated the American public, culminating in consecutive life sentences for both Elmer Wayne Henley and David Brooks, who were held legally accountable for their willing participation in the slaughter. Beyond the immediate judicial outcomes, the catastrophic failure to recognize the pattern of disappearances forced a fundamental reckoning within the criminal justice system. The staggering loss of life exposed the fatal flaws in how missing juvenile cases were processed, ultimately catalyzing nationwide systemic reforms, transforming interagency communication protocols, and ensuring that future reports of missing children would never again be dismissed with the tragic, negligent indifference that had allowed Dean Corll to operate with absolute impunity. The monumental task of identifying the 29 exhumed victims presented an unprecedented challenge for the Harris County Medical Examiner Office and local forensic investigators in the late summer and autumn of 1973. Because the murders had spanned a period of 3 years and the bodies had been subjected to the brutal Texas heat, the corrosive effects of agricultural lime, and the natural elements in shallow graves, the physical condition of the recovered remains was profoundly deteriorated. Forensic science during this era operated entirely without the benefit of modern genetic testing or advanced digital reconstruction techniques, forcing investigators to rely exclusively on traditional, painstaking methods of identification. Pathologists and anthropologists worked exhaustive hours inside overwhelmed morgue facilities, meticulously cataloging skeletal structures, examining dental records, and analyzing personal effects such as clothing fragments, distinctive jewelry, and specific bone fractures that families might remember. The sheer volume of the deceased necessitated the establishment of a temporary morgue infrastructure, while the continuous influx of grieving, desperate parents seeking information about their missing sons created an atmosphere of unbearable sorrow. Medical professionals were forced to ask traumatized mothers and fathers for agonizing details regarding their children and their dental history, childhood injuries, or unique physical characteristics, transforming the scientific process of forensic identification into a deeply emotional ordeal that scarred everyone involved. Many of the remains were so badly decomposed that identification dragged on for several agonizing months, leaving families suspended in a torturous state of uncertainty. While a small number of victims remained unidentified for decades, their names lost to the passage of time and the deliberate obscuration of their killer. As the identities of the victims were slowly confirmed and released to the public, a profound wave of collective guilt, anger, and devastation washed over the communities of the Houston Heights and Pasadena. For years, the parents of these vanished boys had been systematically dismissed by local law enforcement agencies, repeatedly assured by uniformed officers that their sons were merely rebellious teenagers who had chosen to run away from home to seek adventure or escape domestic dissatisfaction. Families had spent their life savings hiring private investigators, printing homemade missing person flyers, and traveling across the state chasing false sightings, entirely unaware that their children had been brutally tortured and murdered just a few miles from their own front doors. The revelation that Dean Corll, a familiar and outwardly pleasant neighborhood figure, was the architect of this unprecedented slaughter shattered the community and its fundamental sense of safety and trust. Parents who had unknowingly purchased candy from Corll, or who had allowed their sons to socialize with David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, were consumed by a haunting, retrospective horror. The psychological trauma inflicted upon these working-class neighborhoods was immeasurable, as residents struggled to reconcile the monstrous reality of the crimes with the mundane, suburban backdrop against which they had occurred. The tragedy completely obliterated the prevailing era of innocence, forcing a sudden, brutal awakening to the reality that unspeakable evil could easily hide behind a polite smile, a tidy lawn, and the seemingly harmless offering of a sweet treat. The legal reckoning for the surviving perpetrators commenced in a media environment charged with intense public outrage and an overwhelming demand for immediate, severe justice. Elmer Wayne Henley faced trial first, stepping into a courtroom that was heavily guarded to prevent distraught family members from attacking the young man who had betrayed their sons. The defense strategy for Henley heavily relied on the assertion of extreme psychological manipulation and physical duress, arguing that the teenager was essentially another victim of the predatory grooming and coercive control exerted by the older man. Defense attorneys attempted to portray Henley as a frightened adolescent trapped in a terrifying situation, compelled to participate in the atrocities under the constant, credible threat of his own imminent murder. However, the prosecution systematically dismantled this narrative by presenting an overwhelming volume of evidence demonstrating his active, willing, and financially motivated participation in the serial murder enterprise. Prosecutors meticulously detailed the bounty system that had been established, proving that Henley had repeatedly and voluntarily ventured into the community to lure unsuspecting victims, often his own friends and classmates, specifically to collect monetary rewards. The state highlighted the numerous opportunities Henley had possessed to escape, to notify authorities, or simply to stop bringing boys to the Pasadena residence, noting that he had freely come and gone from the properties for months without raising a single alarm. The jury ultimately rejected the defense of duress, recognizing the profound moral depravity required to deliver innocent peers to a known torturer, and convicted Henley on multiple counts of murder, resulting in 6 consecutive terms of life imprisonment. The subsequent trial of David Owen Brooks followed a similar trajectory, though it presented a slightly different psychological profile of complicity. Brooks had been involved with the mastermind for a significantly longer period, having been groomed since he was barely a teenager himself, which allowed his defense to argue even more strongly that he had been entirely brainwashed and stripped of his autonomous free will. Brooks attempted to minimize his direct involvement in the actual killings, suggesting that his role was largely passive and that he frequently left the room or the residence when the violence reached its peak. Nevertheless, the prosecution argued forcefully that Brooks was the foundational enabler of the entire operation, the individual who had initially bridged the gap between the predatory adult and the vulnerable adolescent population of the Houston Heights. The state emphasized that Brooks had personally facilitated the abductions of several young men, driving them to the house under false pretenses and actively assisting in their physical restraint on the infamous torture board. The sheer longevity of his association with the older man, combined with his failure to intervene as the body count climbed into the dozens, negated any sympathetic consideration from the jury. Like his younger counterpart, Brooks was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, ensuring that both surviving members of the deadly trio would spend the remainder of their natural lives incarcerated within the Texas penal system, facing the daily, inescapable reality of their monumental crimes. The horrific legacy of the Houston mass murders extended far beyond the confines of the Texas courtrooms, serving as a bleak but necessary catalyst for fundamental changes in American law enforcement protocols regarding missing children. Prior to the discovery of these victims, police departments across the nation operated under a deeply flawed, institutionalized bias that overwhelmingly categorized missing teenagers, particularly males, as voluntary runaways, thereby denying these cases the urgent investigative resources required for potential abductions. The catastrophic failure to connect the disappearance of 29 boys within a concentrated geographic area exposed the fatal vulnerabilities in local, state, and federal criminal tracking systems. In the years following the tragedy, intense public pressure and relentless advocacy from the victims and their families forced legislative and procedural reforms aimed at eliminating the runaway assumption. This case, alongside other high-profile serial killings of the era, directly contributed to the eventual establishment of comprehensive national databases for missing and exploited children, ensuring that disparate police departments could share critical information and recognize predatory patterns before the death toll reached such incomprehensible heights. Furthermore, the tragedy profoundly altered the field of criminology, providing researchers with a terrifyingly clear case study of predatory grooming, the psychological dynamics of murderous partnerships, and the precise methods serial offenders use to camouflage their activities within ordinary communities. Decades after the final body was removed from the coastal dunes and the dense pine forests, the shadow of Dean Corll continues to linger over the landscape of American criminal history as a grim reminder of systemic failure and human depravity. The physical structures where the tortures occurred have long since been demolished, replaced by new developments that bear no visible trace of the nightmares they replaced. But the emotional scars inflicted upon the surviving families remain a permanent, unhealed wound. The accomplices, Henley and Brooks, routinely faced the parole board over the subsequent decades, their requests for early release consistently and vehemently denied following passionate, heartbreaking testimonies from the relatives of the boys they helped slaughter. Brooks eventually died in prison, while Henley remains incarcerated, serving as a living artifact of one of the darkest chapters in the 20th century. The narrative of the Candyman killer serves as a perpetual warning about the dangers of institutional complacency and the absolute necessity of listening to the frantic pleas of parents when their children inexplicably vanish. The 29 young men who lost their lives to his insatiable cruelty are now remembered not as rebellious runaways who abandoned their families, but as tragic victims of a sophisticated, merciless predator who exploited the very bonds of adolescent friendship to orchestrate an unprecedented reign of terror that forever changed the way society protects its most vulnerable members against violence. The ongoing reverberations of the Houston mass murders continue to resonate through the collective memory of the American judicial system, modern forensic science, and the families who spent decades searching for answers. Although the principal architect of the terror, Dean Corll, met a violent end on the floor of his Pasadena residence in August 1973, the cultural shockwaves of his crimes permanently altered how law enforcement agencies across the United States approach missing juveniles, urban transit patterns, and serial predator behavior. For generations of Texans who lived through the trauma, the names of Corll, Brooks, and Henley became synonymous with an unprecedented betrayal of innocence that shattered the quiet complacency of suburban life. The realization that 29 young men had vanished into shallow graves while their communities went about their daily routines forced a permanent reckoning with the dark undercurrents that can silently thrive beneath an ordinary, polite facade. The historical weight of the tragedy remains a foundational case study within criminal profiling textbooks, serving as a chilling reminder of how predatory grooming, peer manipulation, and administrative negligence can conspire to grant a monster absolute operational freedom for years on END.as. The decades advanced. The physical landscape of the crimes underwent a total transformation, erasing the tangible markers of the horror while leaving the historical memory entirely intact. The residential structures on Columbia Street, Schuler Street, and the rental properties in Pasadena, where the tortures took place, were eventually demolished, replaced by modern developments, commercial spaces, and roadways that bear no visible trace of the nightmares once housed within their walls. Yet despite the passing of time, the emotional scars carried by the surviving family members of the victims never truly healed. For many years, the families of the lost boys gathered in quiet remembrance, maintaining a collective vigilance to ensure that the victims would never be reduced to mere statistics in a crime ledger. The establishment of dedicated advocacy groups and the continuous evolution of missing persons registries represented a direct response to the institutional failures that had initially shielded Corll from detection. Law enforcement agencies adopted entirely new paradigms of interjurisdictional cooperation, ensuring that a missing teenager reported in one suburb would trigger immediate alerts across neighboring municipalities rather than being summarily dismissed as a voluntary runaway. The legal and penal realities of the surviving accomplices unfolded over a span of more than half a century, cementing their status as permanent fixtures within the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. David Owen Brooks spent 45 years incarcerated within the state penal system, maintaining a quiet profile while consistently facing opposition whenever his name appeared before the parole board. Brooks ultimately passed away behind bars in May 2020, succumbing to health complications while serving his life sentence, thereby concluding his personal chapter in the grim saga. Meanwhile, Elmer Wayne Henley remained imprisoned across various maximum security units, occasionally granting interviews or participating in documentary projects that dissected the psychological mechanics of their horrific partnership. Henley's regular appearances before the parole board routinely ignited fierce opposition from the families of the victims, who mounted organized campaigns to ensure that the man who delivered their sons to the torture board would never experience freedom again. The state parole panels repeatedly denied his release, acknowledging the sheer magnitude of his crimes and the enduring devastation inflicted upon the community, ensuring that Henley would live out his remaining years as a ward of the state. In recent years, modern forensic advancements have breathed new life into the ongoing effort to resolve the final remaining mysteries of the Houston mass murders, offering a glimmer of closure for cases long thought unsolvable. While 28 of the 29 recovered victims were successfully identified through dental records and traditional anthropology in the aftermath of the discovery, one young man interred beneath the dirt floor of the Pasadena storage shed stubbornly resisted all historical attempts at identification. Known formally as the John Doe of the Houston mass murders, this unidentified teenager became the primary focus of contemporary cold case investigators utilizing cutting-edge forensic genealogy, advanced DNA phenotyping, and digital facial reconstruction. Partnering with organizations such as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, forensic specialists released updated likenesses and detailed descriptions of the distinctive striped swim trunks found among his personal effects, hoping to prompt a breakthrough from distant relatives or aging acquaintances who might recognize the profile. This relentless pursuit of a name demonstrates a profound institutional commitment to ensuring that every single victim reclaims his true identity, emphasizing that even after more than 50 years, society refuses to allow the victims of the Candy Man to remain forgotten shadows in the history of American crime.